The stars looked cold and empty, too. Ambassador Zephyr, as he stood in the communication chamber of the Corellian Council building, his blue-clawed hands shook as he prepared to send what might be his people's final message to the galaxy. Outside the windows he could see the evacuation ships loading. Families and children, their soft yellow lights cutting through the darkness of early morning. The Vorthech Empire was coming. Their massive war fleets had already destroyed 3 Corellian colonies in the outer systems. Reports from the survivors painted a terrible picture of death and destruction. The Vorthech did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They simply wiped out every living thing on the planets they conquered and claimed the empty worlds for their expanding empire. Zephyr had served as ambassador for 20 years, working to build peaceful relationships with other species across the galaxy. He had always believed that civilized beings would help each other when faced with extinction. Now he was about to find out if that belief was true. He activated the long-range communication array and began recording his message. His voice was steady, though his heart was breaking. This is Ambassador Zephyr of the Corellian Council, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Our peaceful civilization faces complete destruction at the hands of the Vorthech Empire. We have no military capable of stopping them. We are a species of farmers, teachers, and artists. We have never harmed another living being. He paused, looking out at his city one more time. The buildings were made of smooth white stone that gleamed in the starlight. Gardens grew on every rooftop, filled with flowering plants that his people had tended for thousands of years. Was beautiful and peaceful, and soon it would all be ash. We beg any civilized species to help us. We can offer our knowledge of agriculture and peaceful technologies. We can share our art and our culture. We ask only for the chance to survive and continue living in harmony with the galaxy. Please, if anyone receives this message, help us. Time is running short. The message was sent across every known communication channel, reaching deep space monitoring stations, trade ships, and the official channels of the galactic community. Zephyr sat back in his chair and waited. Surely someone would answer. Surely the great civilizations of the galaxy would not let an entire peaceful species die. The first response came from the Altarian Federation 3 hours later. Their message was polite but firm. The Altarian Federation sympathizes with your situation, but we cannot risk conflict with the Vorthech Empire. We suggest you negotiate surrender terms. The Century Trade Alliance sent a similar message to the Andromedan Republic. One by one, every major power in the galaxy declined to help. Some offered to take a few thousand Corellian refugees, but none would risk fighting the Vorth to save Zyr's people. The ambassador felt his hope dying with each refusal. The great civilizations of the galaxy were too comfortable, too safe in their protected systems to risk themselves for strangers. The Vorth had built their empire on this fear, knowing that other species would rather sacrifice the weak than stand up to bullies. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Lieutenant Jake Morrison was pulling the night shift at Luna Station, a small human monitoring post on the far side of Earth's moon. He was 26 years old, born and raised on Mars, and this was his first assignment. In the outer system, most nights were quiet, filled with routine scans of nearby space, and the occasional radio. Chatter from passing ships, his partner for the shift was communications officer Lisa Parker, a woman from Texas who had joined the Earth Defense Coalition after her brother died in a mining accident on Europa. She was good at her job and had a talent for picking up faint signals that other operators might miss. "Hey, Jake," she called from her station, "I'm getting something weird on the emergency band. Sounds like an alien distress call up from his routine sensor readings. Alien contact was still new for humanity. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 15 years ago and had made contact with a few other species, but most of the galaxy still considered Earth a backwater planet, populated by primitives. "Can you clean it up?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the communication screen. Lisa worked her equipment with practice skill, filtering out static and strengthening the signal. Slowly, a voice became clear, speaking in a language neither of them recognized, but the universal translation software that Earth had developed was getting better every year. "This is Ambassador Z of the Corellian Council," the translated voice said. The software gave it a slightly mechanical sound, but the emotion still came through clearly. "Our peaceful civilization faces complete destruction at the hands of the Vorthech Empire." Jake and Lisa listened in growing shock as the alien ambassador described his people's situation. The entire species of peaceful beings was about to be wiped out, and they were begging anyone in the galaxy for help. "Jesus," Lisa whispered, "they're going to be slaughtered." Jake was already reaching for the priority communication link to Earth Command. This was way above his pay grade. Someone needed to know about this immediately. The call went through to Admiral Helen Torres at Earth Defense Headquarters in Geneva, who was in her 50s, a veteran of the Europa conflict, who had helped design humanity's first space defense systems. She listened to the recorded message twice before speaking. "Are you certain this signal is genuine?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied. "We verified it through multiple channels. It's definitely an alien distress call, and it's being broadcast across the entire galaxy." Admiral Torres was quiet for a long moment. She had read the reports about other galactic civilizations. Most of them seemed to view humans as violent primitives from a dangerous world. Earth was classified as what the aliens called a death world. Okay. A planet so hostile that most galactic species couldn't survive there for more than a few minutes. "Has anyone else responded to this call?" she asked. Lisa had been monitoring the various response channels. "Several major powers have declined to help. They'll say they won't risk conflict with this Vorthech Empire." The Admiral felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had seen bullies before, both as a child growing up in the slums of Mexico City and later during her military career. And GT, the pattern was always the same. Bullies kept bullying until someone stood up to them. "I'm forwarding this to Captain Ryan Blake," she said. "If anyone's going to do something stupid and heroic, it might as well be him." Captain Blake was in command of the ESV Liberty, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. He was 38 years old, born in Alaska, and had spent his childhood hunting and fishing in some of the most dangerous wilderness left on Earth. His crew trusted him completely because he had never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When The communication reached him. Blake was in his quarters reading reports about alien technology. He listened to the Corellian ambassador's plea 3 times, and each time he felt his anger growing. Entire civilization was about to die, and the so-called civilized galaxy was going to let it happen. He called a senior staff to the briefing room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we just received a distress call from a species called the Carolinians. They're about to be wiped out by something called the Vorak Empire, and nobody else in the galaxy is willing to help them." His first officer, Commander Sarah Davis, frowned at the star charts Blake had pulled up. "Sir, that's way outside human space. You don't even have detailed maps of that region." "I know," Blake replied, "and I also know that if we go out there, you might be starting a war with an empire that could probably crush Earth without breaking a sweat." The room was quiet. Everyone understood what he was saying. This wasn't their fight. These weren't their people. Humanity had enough problems of its own without looking for trouble halfway across the galaxy. But Blake continued, "I keep thinking about something my grandfather used to tell me," he said, "that sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Especially when it's dangerous." He looked around the room at his officers. These were good people, every one of them. They had joined the Earth Defense Coalition to protect humanity. But Blake knew they were also the kind of people who couldn't stand by and watch innocent beings get murdered. "I'm not ordering anyone to come with me," he said. "This is volunteer only, but I'm going to answer that distress call. I'm going to take the liberty to Carol in space, and I'm going to see if there's anything we can do to help." The vote was unanimous. The ESV Liberty and her escort ships moved through hyperspace like sharks cutting through dark water. Captain Ryan Blake stood on the bridge, watching the swirling colors of faster than light travel, knowing that every hour brought them closer to a battle they might not survive. His small fleet consisted of only 12 ships, while intelligence reports suggested the Vorthech Empire could field hundreds in. The ship's laboratory, Dr. Alex Chen worked around the clock analyzing every piece of data they had about their enemies. He was a thin man from California who had spent most of his career studying alien technology. The information about the Vorach was limited, but what they had learned was not encouraging. "They're a military empire," he explained to Captain Blake during one of their daily briefings. "Everything in their society revolves around conquest and expansion. They've been growing for over 200 years, absorbing smaller civilizations and turning their populations into slave labor." Blake studied the holographic displays showing Vorth ship designs. Their vessels were massive and heavily armed, built like flying fortresses. What about their tactics? They rely on overwhelming firepower and superior numbers, Chen replied. "Most species surrender as soon as they see the size of a Vorth fleet. Those that don't get pounded into dust by concentrated bombardment." Blake nodded grimly. The human approach to warfare was very different. Earth had always been a dangerous place where survival required speed, cunning, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing situations. Human military doctrine emphasized mobility, surprise attacks, and hitting the enemy where they least expected it. Meanwhile, in the Vorthach home system of Nex Prime, Commander Krexel was preparing his forces for what should have been a Simple extermination campaign. He was a massive reptilian being over 7 feet tall, with thick armored scales and claws that could tear through metal like all. Vorthach, he had been bred for war from birth. His flagship, the destroyer of worlds, was the largest vessel in the Vorthach fleet. Its weapons could crack a planet's crust, and its armor could withstand anything the galaxy's known civilizations could throw at it. Rexel had used it to destroy 43 worlds over the past decade. The Corellian system will fall within 3 days, he told his officers during their final planning session. Their primitive defenses cannot stand against our might. We'll make an example of them that will be remembered across the galaxy. Intelligence officer, a smaller but equally vicious, brought him the latest reports from their advanced scouts. The Corellians have begun evacuating their civilian population to the outer planets. Our spies report no significant military build-up. They appear to be relying on diplomatic appeals for help. Krexanal laughed, a sound like grinding stone. The civilized species of this galaxy are too weak and comfortable to risk themselves for strangers. The Carolinians will die alone and forgotten. But even as he spoke those words, his long-range sensors were picking up the faint traces of an approaching fleet. The signals were strange, unlike any ship design in the Vorth databases. When the sensor operator reported the readings, dismissed them as background noise, probably just some minor trade convoy that will flee as soon as they see our forces. He said the Vorthach had grown so accustomed to easy victories that they could not imagine any species actually challenging them in the Corellian home system. Defense Coordinator Yilmith was trying to organize what little resistance his people could manage. The Corellians were a peaceful species who had not fought a war in over 500 years. Their few defensive platforms were designed to protect against pirates and asteroids. A full-scale military invasion. Yilmith was older than most of his people, with silver scale that showed his advanced age. He had been a teacher before the crisis began, specializing in galactic history. He found himself responsible for defending his entire civilization with resources that would barely stop a determined smuggler. How long before the evacuation ships reached the outer colonies? He asked his aide, a younger Corellian named Tixara. Another 18 hours for the last transport, she replied. And GT, but sir, even if we get everyone to the outer planets, the Vorthach will just follow them. And GT, we cannot hide an entire population forever. Imeth knew she was right. The Carolinians had sent their plea for help across the galaxy, but the responses had been uniformly negative. The great civilizations were too afraid of Vorthach retaliation to risk helping a primitive species like his own. He looked out at his world's 2 moons, wondering if his grandchildren would live to see them rise again. The Carolinians had built a beautiful civilization based on art, learning, and harmony with nature. In a few days it would all be reduced to radioactive ash. Back on Earth, Admiral Helen Torres was dealing with a political crisis when word of Captain Blake's mission reached the Earth government. Several council members demanded that she recall the fleet immediately. This is madness, declared Councilor Peter Williams, a man from New York who had always opposed expanding Earth's military. We're risking war with an Empire that could destroy our entire planet for what? Some aliens we've never even met. Tora stood her ground. In the emergency session, she was a small woman, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 30 years defending humanity from threats, both foreign and domestic. These aliens are facing genocide, she said firmly. If we stand by and watch it happen, what does that say about us as a species? Are we so afraid for our own safety that we'll let innocent people die? Counselor Janet Lee from Australia supported. Tors, the captain, and his crew volunteered for this mission. They knew the risks. If we recall them now, we're telling the galaxy that humanity's word means nothing. The debate raged for hours, but in the end, Tors got permission to continue the mission. However, she also received strict orders that no additional Earth forces were to be committed without full council approval. As the human fleet neared Curilian space, they called his senior officers together for a final briefing. The conference room was cramped but efficient, designed for function rather than comfort. Maps of the Corellian system covered the walls, marked with enemy positions and potential battle plans. Commander Sarah Davis, his first officer, had grown up on a mining station in the asteroid belt. She understood better than most how dangerous space could be and how quickly situations could turn deadly. Intelligence suggests the Vorthach fleet will arrive at Corellian Prime in approximately 16 hours, she reported. They bring in approximately 200 ships, including several Dreadnought-class vessels. Major Kate Sullivan, who commanded the Liberty's Marine detachment, whistled softly. Was from Boston, a tough woman who had fought pirates in the outer colonies. 200 ships against our 12, those aren't great odds. No, Blake agreed, but we have some advantages they don't know about. First, they've never fought humans before. They have no idea what our ships can do or how we fight. And GT. Second, they're expecting easy prey. They're not prepared for a real battle. Chief Engineer Rachel Turner, a woman from Texas who could make broken machinery work with spare parts and determination, leaned forward. Sir, our ships are faster and more maneuverable than anything in their fleet. If we can avoid getting caught in a straight-up slugging match, we might have a chance. Blake nodded. The ships were built differently than most alien vessels, where other species favored massive, heavily armored battleships. Humans preferred smaller, faster ships that could strike quickly and disappear before the enemy could respond. Our job isn't to destroy their entire fleet, Blake explained. Our job is to save the Carolinians and make the Vorth think twice about attacking peaceful civilizations. We can do that, we win. But Dr. Chen had been studying alien psychology as well as technology. Captain, there's something else to consider. The Varro have built their entire empire on fear and intimidation. If we can show the galaxy that they can be beaten, other species might find the courage to stand up to them. As the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Corellian space, long-range sensors immediately detected the massive Vorth armada approaching the inner planets. The enemy ships moved in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to level cities. On the Vorthach flagship, Commander K. Zinal received the report of the human fleet's arrival with mild interest. On a small ships against his mighty armada seemed like a joke. Send them a standard warning, he ordered. Tell them to withdraw immediately or face destruction. Once they flee, we can proceed with exterminating the Carolinians without distraction. But even as he gave the order, something nagged at him. The unknown ships had appeared exactly where his scouts had predicted the Corellian defense would be weakest. That suggested either remarkable luck or detailed knowledge of Vorthach tactics. Intelligence Officer Velter was less concerned. Commander, our databases show no record of these ship designs. They appear to be from a primitive world called Earth. The galactic community classifies them as a minor species from a dangerous planet, a Deathworld species. Krexel asked with interest. He had heard stories of such worlds, planets so hostile that they produced unusually aggressive life forms, but he had never encountered one. Personally, the human fleet emerged from hyperspace like ghosts materializing from the void. Captain Blake stood on the bridge of the HFY Liberty, watching as his tactical display filled with red dots representing the massive Vorthach armada, enemy ships against his 12. It faced worse odds before, but never with so much at stake. Communications, open a channel to the Vorthach fleet, Blake ordered. His voice was calm, but everyone on the bridge could feel the tension in the air. Lieutenant Bobby Martinez, the ship's communications officer, worked quickly at his console. Channel open, sir. Blake stepped forward, knowing that his next words might start a war that could destroy Earth itself, but he also knew that some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. Fourth Fleet. This is Captain Ryan Blake of the Terran Defense Coalition. You are attacking a peaceful species under our protection. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. On the Vorthach flagship destroyer of worlds, Commander Kazanal stared at his communication screen in disbelief. Primitive species was actually threatening him, the conqueror of 43 worlds, the terror of the Outer Rim. Did that creature just threaten us? He asked Intelligence Officer Velter. Velter checked his instruments twice before responding. Yes, Commander, the primitive is demanding that we withdraw from Caroline space. Krexel threw back his massive reptilian head and roared with laughter. The sound echoed through the bridge, causing his officers to join in. The idea that 12 tiny ships could threaten the might of the Vorthach Empire was the funniest thing he had heard in years. Send a squadron to disable their lead ship, he ordered. Still chuckling, we'll show these primitives what happens when they challenge their betters. Make sure to leave some survivors so they can carry word of Vorth might back to their pathetic home world. Squadron leader Czar commanded 12 Vorth destroyers, each one larger than the biggest human ship. He had been bred for war like all Vorthach, trained from childhood to show no mercy to inferior species. As his ships moved toward the human fleet, was already planning how to their vessels, without destroying them completely, target their engines and weapon systems. He told his gunners, the commander wants prisoners to interrogate. As the Vorth squadron approached, something unexpected happened. The human ship scattered like startled fish, moving in directions that seemed random, but were actually carefully calculated. The HFY Liberty twisted through space with impossible agility, its engines burning bright against the darkness. Are they doing? Zir demanded. Why are they not maintaining formation? His tactical officer, a younger Vorth named Krylek studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. Sir, their ships are moving in ways that should tear them apart. No known species can survive the gravitational forces. They are generating what the Vorthach did not understand was that humans had evolved on a world where survival meant adapting to extreme conditions. Earth's gravity was nearly twice what most galactic species could tolerate. Human bodies were built to withstand forces that would crush other beings. Commander Sarah Davis felt the acceleration pressing her into her command chair as the Liberty performed a maneuver that would have been impossible for any other species. All weapons target the lead Vorthach ship. Fire when ready. The Liberty's plasma cannon spoke with voices of thunder, but these were not the crude energy weapons the Vorthach expected from a primitive species. Human weapons had been designed to work in Earth's dangerous environment where a single malfunction could mean death. They were precise, powerful, and utterly reliable. The first Vorthach destroyer died in a flash of brilliant light as its shields collapsed and its hull cracked open like an eggshell. Atmosphere vented into space, carrying the frozen bodies of its crew into the void. Zactor watched in shock as his flagship simply vanished from his tactical display. Impossible, he whispered. Their weapons should not be able to penetrate our shields, but the humans were not finished. The ESV Houston, commanded by Captain Linda Foster, rolled beneath a Vorth destroyer and fired directly into its unprotected belly. The alien ship broke in half, its reactor containment failing in a cascade of explosions. The ESV Phoenix under Captain Mike Rodriguez demonstrated another aspect of human warfare that the Vorthach had never encountered. And GT, instead of trying to match the alien ship's firepower, it used speed and precision to target weak points in their design. Human engineers had studied Vorth ships captured from pirates and identified exactly where to hit them for maximum damage. In less than 5 minutes, all 12 ships of Zactor's squadron were either destroyed or drifting helplessly in space. The Vorthach commander himself floated in an escape pod, watching in horror as primitive vessels picked apart his forces like a pack of wolves bringing down much larger prey. On the main Vorthach flagship, Commander Krexenal stood frozen at his command station. In over 20 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. His elite squadron ships that had destroyed entire planetary defense fleets had been wiped out by 12 primitive vessels. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence said they were a minor species from a dangerous world. Intelligence officer was frantically checking his databases, trying to understand what they were facing. Commander, I am reading energy signatures unlike anything in our records. Their weapons appear to be based on principles we do not understand. What the Vorthach did not know was that human technology had developed along very different lines than that of other galactic species. Most aliens had evolved on peaceful worlds where cooperation was more important than competition. Their technology reflected this, favoring efficiency and harmony over raw power. But humans had evolved in constant conflict with their environment and each other. Every human invention had been tested against the most hostile conditions imaginable. Their weapons were designed to work when everything else failed. Their ships were built to survive impacts that would destroy other Vessels and their tactics were based on thousands of years of warfare against equally dangerous opponents. Major Kate Sullivan was preparing to lead the first boarding party onto one of the disabled Vorthok ships. She was a veteran of combat operations on Europa. Criminals had hidden in ice caves filled with poisonous gases and sub-zero temperatures. Remember, she told her Marines as they prepared to board the shuttle, these aliens have never fought humans before. Do not know what we are capable of. Use that advantage. The boarding shuttle ESV Ranger approached the crippled Vorthach destroyer through clouds of venting atmosphere and floating debris. The alien ship was 3 times larger than any human vessel, its hull covered in thick armor plating designed to withstand orbital bombardment, but the human engineers had done their job well. The Ranger's cutting tools sliced through the alien hull like it was made of paper, opening a breach large enough for the boarding party to enter. Sullivan led her Marines into the alien ship with weapons ready and full environmental suits activated. The interior was dark and filled with strange sounds, the groans of twisted metal and the hiss of escaping gases. The first Vorthach they encountered was a wounded warrior trying to reach an emergency station. He was over 7 feet tall, covered in thick scales, and armed with claws that could tear through steel. By all rights, he should have been more than a match for the smaller human soldiers, but the Vorthach had never fought an opponent from a death world. Sullivan moved with speed and precision that seemed impossible to the alien warrior. Her weapon fired once, a clean shot that dropped the massive reptile before he could even raise his claws. The other 4th survivors realized they were facing something completely outside their experience. These small mammals moved like liquid death. Their weapons never missed. They showed no fear even when vastly outnumbered. Within 30 minutes, Sullivan's team had secured the entire ship and taken the surviving crew prisoner, but more importantly, they had captured intact examples of Vorth technology and computer systems that would give human scientists a complete picture of their enemy's capabilities. Back on the Liberty's bridge, Captain Blake watched as his small fleet regrouped after their first victory. He knew this was only the beginning. The Vor had hundreds more ships, and now they knew that the humans were a real threat. Communications, get me a channel to the Corellian Defense Forces, he ordered. When the connection was established, Blake found himself speaking to Defense Coordinator Yilmoth, who was still trying to understand what had just happened. This is Captain Blake of the human fleet. We have engaged the Vorthach advance force and achieved victory, but they will be back with more ships. We need to coordinate our defenses. Yilm's voice shook with emotion. Captain Blake, we cannot believe what we have witnessed. 12 of your ships destroyed, an entire Vorthok squadron. How is this possible? Blake smiled grimly. Coordinator, humans come from what you call a death world. Everything on our planet has been trying to kill us for millions of years. We have gotten very good at surviving. On the Vorthach flagship, Commander K. Zenal was receiving reports from the few survivors of Zactor's squadron. What they told him changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. The battle for the Corellian home system raged for 3 days. Commander K. Zenal had called in every available ship from across the Vorthach Empire, turning what should have been a Simple extermination into the largest space battle in galactic history. Over 400 Vorth vessels now filled the space around Corellian Prime, their weapons lighting up the darkness with deadly fire, but the humans refused to break. Captain Blake stood on the Liberty's bridge, watching his tactical display as another wave of enemy fighters closed on their position. His ship had taken heavy damage with hull breaches on 3 decks and his main engines running at only 60% power, but the Liberty kept fighting just like every other human vessel in the fleet. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported Lieutenant Amy Collins, the ship's damage control officer. She was from Oregon, a former firefighter who had joined the space service after losing her family in a forest fire. Sealing now weapon status, Blake asked. Main guns at 80% point defense systems. Operational, replied weapons officer Tony Garcia. He was a young man from New Mexico who had grown up hunting in the desert, learning to make every shot count when ammunition was scarce. What amazed the aliens watching the battle was that human ships continued to fight, even when they should have been destroyed. The ESV Dallas had lost half its hull to Vorth plasma cannon, but Captain Joe Murphy kept his remaining weapons firing until the very end. ESV Denver's engines had been completely destroyed, leaving it drifting helplessly in space. But Captain Lisa Wright used her ship's remaining power to turn it into a missile, ramming it into a Vorth dreadnought, taking both ships out in a massive explosion. This was something the Vorth had never encountered before in their experience. Damaged ships surrendered or retreated. The idea of fighting until total destruction was foreign to their way of thinking. On the surface of Corellian Prime, Colonel Danny Brooks was leading human ground forces in the defense of the planet's major cities. He was a career soldier from Montana who had spent his childhood camping and hunting in the Rocky Mountains. To him, the forests and mountains of the Corellian home world seemed almost peaceful compared to Earth's wilderness. The Vorthech had managed to land assault troops in several locations, thinking they could force a quick surrender by threatening the civilian population. What they found instead were human soldiers who fought with a ferocity that defied understanding. Contact front, called Sergeant Bill Jackson over the radio. He was leading a squad of Marines through the ruins of what had been a Corellian art museum. The enemy had taken position among the broken sculptures and paintings, using them as cover. Brooks watched through his tactical display as Jackson's squad moved through the rubble with practiced ease. These men and women had trained for combat Earth's most hostile environments, from the frozen wastes of Antarctica to the burning deserts of Africa. Fighting in a partially destroyed building was just another day. At the office, the Vorthog warriors who faced them were confused and demoralized. They had been told that ground combat would be simple, that most species surrendered as soon as they saw Vorth troops, but these humans seemed to actually enjoy fighting. They moved through dangerous terrain like they were born to it, and they never showed fear. Even when heavily outnumbered, why did they not surrender? Demanded Vorthech. Ground Commander Texrol, as he watched his forces take heavy casualties in what should have been an easy occupation. They outnumbered 10-1. His aide, a younger Vorthech named Morton, had been studying human tactics since the battle began. Commander, these beings appear to come from what our databases classify as a Class 12 death world. Perhaps their behavior is influenced by their origin. Environment. Back in space, Dr. Sam Rodriguez was treating wounded crew members in the Liberty's medical bay, while also trying to explain to amazed Corellian scientists exactly what humans were. Dr. Rodriguez had grown up in Puerto Rico, where hurricanes were a regular part of life. He understood better than most how dangerous environments shape the creatures that lived in them. Your species evolved on a peaceful world, explained to Corellian Chief Scientist Pelinara as he worked on a human marine who had been injured in a boarding action. Your gravity's less than half of Earth's. Your weather is stable. Your predators are small and relatively harmless. Pelinara watched in amazement as the injured marine sat up and asked when he could return to duty. By Corellian standards, his wounds should have been fatal, but how do you survive in such conditions? We adapt, Rodriguez replied simply. Humans have been adapting to impossible situations for millions of years. It's what we do. The Corellian scientist was beginning to understand something that the Vorthach had not yet grasped. These humans were not just another space-faring species. They were the product of a world so hostile that it had forged them into something unprecedented in galactic history. Chief Engineer Rachel Turner was working miracles in the Liberty's engine room, keeping the ship running with spare parts salvaged from destroyed Vorth vessels. She had grown up on a ranch in Texas where fixing broken equipment with whatever was available was a daily necessity. Ma'am, we've lost the primary power coupling, reported Ensign Mark Wilson, a young engineer from Iowa who was learning that space combat was very different from the simulations he had studied at the academy. Turner looked at the damaged components and smiled. Well, then we'll just have to build a new one. Hand me that piece of vorthole plating and that power conduit from their fighter. Wilson stared at her in disbelief. You can't build a power coupling from enemy salvaged technologies are completely incompatible. Son, Turner replied as she began cutting and welding pieces together. I once built a functioning engine from tractor parts and kitchen appliances. Alien technology is just another kind of puzzle. 20 minutes later, the Liberty's engines were running at full power. Again, cobbled together from human ingenuity and Vorthach hardware in a way that should have been impossible but somehow worked perfectly. Commander Krexenal was beginning to realize that he was facing something beyond his experience. His massive fleet had been reduced to fewer than 200 ships while the humans still had 8 vessels operational. Worse, every hour of combat taught the humans more about Vorthach tactics while revealing human capabilities that defied everything the Empire thought it knew about warfare. How many of their ships have we destroyed? He asked intelligence officer. For confirmed kills, Commander, no, but, sir, their remaining ships are fighting more effectively now than when the battle began. They appear to be learning from each engagement. Krexel studied the tactical display, watching as human ships moved in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully coordinated. They struck at weak points in his formations, disappeared before his forces could respond, then struck again from unexpected directions. What manner of beings are these? He wondered aloud. Belter had been studying captured human equipment and prisoners, What he had learned was disturbing, Commander. These humans appear to be what our ancestors called apex predators. They evolved as hunters on a world where everything else was also trying to kill them. That is impossible, Krexel replied. No species could survive in such an environment long enough to develop intelligence, but even as he spoke, he knew something was wrong with that assumption. The evidence was right in front of him. These humans had not only survived their hostile world, they had been shaped by it into something that could challenge the might of the Vorthech Empire. On the bridge of the ESV Houston, Captain Linda Foster was coordinating with Corellian ground forces to evacuate civilians from combat zones. She had grown up in Alaska, where communities had to work together to survive harsh winters and dangerous wildlife. Corellian Transport 7, this is Captain Foster, will provide cover while you evacuate the settlement on the northern continent. The Corellian pilot's voice was filled with gratitude. Captain Foster, we cannot thank you enough. Your people are risking everything to save. Stranger, Foster smiled as she watched her weapons officer target another wave of Vorthech fighters. That's what good neighbors do. This concept was completely foreign to Vorthech thinking. In their empire, the strong took what they wanted from the weak. The idea of risking your life to protect others with no expectation of reward was something they could not understand. As the battle continued, word began to spread throughout the galaxy. The impossible was happening. A primitive species from a dangerous world was actually fighting the Vorthech Empire to a standstill. More shocking still, we're doing it to protect strangers who could offer them nothing in return. On distant worlds, press populations began to whisper about the humans who had answered a call for help when no one else would. In the halls of galactic government, diplomats who had refused to help the Carolinians began to realize they might have made a terrible mistake. The Vorth and GT Empire had built their power on the assumption that civilized species would always choose safety over principle. They had never encountered a species that considered protecting the innocent more important than protecting themselves. Dr. Rodriguez received a communication from a Corellian physician who was treating human wounded in the planet's hospitals. The 5th day of the battle began with Commander Krexel making a decision that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. The mighty Vorthech Empire, conqueror of 43 worlds, was preparing to retreat from a system they had expected to capture in hours. His fleet had been reduced to less than 100 ships, while the humans still had 6 vessels operational. Worse than the losses was the effect on Vorthog morale. Warriors bred for conquest and trained from birth to believe in their superiority now flinched when human ships appeared on their sensors. Commander reported as tactical officer, long-range sensors are detecting multiple fleets approaching our position. They appear to be from various species throughout the sector. Krexenal felt his blood turn cold. News of the battle had spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace communication. Species that had lived in fear of Vorthech expansion for generations were finally seeing proof that the Empire could be beaten. And GT, he asked. Less than 30%, sir. Many of our remaining ships are operating with skeleton crews and limited weapons, all on the bridge of the ESV Liberty. Captain Blake was receiving similar reports about approaching fleets, but unlike the Vorak commander, he was smiling. Captain Communications Officer Bobby Martinez reported, "We're getting messages from the approaching ships. The Altarian Federation is sending a battle group. The Century Trade Alliance has dispatched their entire home fleet, even some species I've never heard of are coming to help." Blake nodded with satisfaction. It seems the galaxy has found its courage after all. What Blake understood and what Krexel was just beginning to realize was that the Vorth Empire's greatest weapon had always been fear. They had convinced the galaxy that resistance was hopeless, that any species who opposed them would be crushed without mercy, but the humans had broken that spell. Dr. Alex Chen, monitoring communications from across the galaxy, brought Blake even more encouraging news. "Captain, we're receiving reports of uprisings on at least 12 worlds under Vorak occupation. Slave populations are rebelling, and several colonial governors have declared independence. The empire that had taken 2 centuries to build was beginning to crumble in a matter of days, but Commander Krexenol was not ready to accept defeat. In Vorthach culture, a military leader who retreated without exhausting every option faced execution. For cowardice, he decided to make one final gamble, send a message to the human commander. He ordered, "Challenge their leader to single combat. If I can kill him, it might break their spirit and allow us to escape with honor." Message reached Captain Blake within minutes. Commander Kexinal, according to Vorthach military tradition, was challenging him to personal combat to determine the outcome of the battle. Blake's senior officers immediately protested. "Sir, this is obviously a trap," Commander Sarah Davis argued. "The Vorth commander is over 7 feet tall and weighs twice what you do. His species is designed for combat, not to mention he probably has claws that could cut through steel," added Major Kate Sullivan. "Captain, you can't seriously be considering this," but Blake was already making his decision. He understood something about leadership that his officers did not. Sometimes a commander had to take risks that went beyond military logic. "If I refuse, the Vorthach will claim that humans are cowards who hide behind superior technology," he explained. "But if I accept and win, it sends a message to the entire galaxy that humans cannot be intimidated by anyone. And if you lose?" Davis asked quietly. Blake smiled grimly. "Then you'll have to finish what we started." A single combat took place on the surface of Corellian Prime in a cleared area between the human and Vorthach ground forces. Both sides watched as their leaders prepared to fight a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Commander K. Zenal was an impressive sight, standing nearly 8 ft tall. His reptilian body was covered in thick scales that could turn aside most small arms fire. His claws were razor sharp, his muscles built for delivering crushing blows that could break bones. Captain Blake looked almost pathetic. Comparison, he was average height for a human, wearing simple combat armor and carrying only a military knife and sidearm. By any logical measure, he should have been dead within seconds. But logic had never been humanity's strongest weapon. "You are brave for a primitive," Krexenol said as they faced each other in the makeshift arena. "I will make your death quick." "I appreciate that," Blake replied calmly. But I should warn you, I grew up in Alaska, everything there tried to eat me from the time I could walk. Vorak Commander attacked with the speed and fury of a natural predator. His claws slashed through the air where Blake had been standing a split second earlier, but the human was no longer there. Blake moved like liquid shadow, his body flowing around the aliens. Attacks with an economy of motion that spoke of years of training in Earth's most dangerous environments. He had learned to fight in conditions where a single mistake meant death or human opponents were just as deadly as wild animals. Crana was stronger and larger, but he had never faced anything like this. The human seemed to anticipate his every move, striking at weak points in his natural armor with surgical precision. Blake's knife found gaps between scales that the Vorthach commander did not even know existed. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours to the thousands of beings watching from both sides. When it ended, Commander Krexel lay motionless on the ground while Captain Blake stood over him, bloody but victorious. The silence that followed was broken by a sound that would be remembered across the galaxy for generations to come. Human ground forces began cheering, joined by the Corellian civilians they had protected, and then by the crews of the approaching alien fleets. This is Admiral Torres of the Earth Defense Coalition, came a voice over the communication channels. I am ordering all Vorthach forces to surrender immediately. Any ship that attempts to flee will be pursued and destroyed. The human admiral had arrived with reinforcements just in time to witness her captain's victory. But more importantly, she had brought with her a dozen other species who had finally found the courage to stand up to their oppressors. The remaining Borth ships surrendered without firing another shot. Their empire's myth of invincibility had been shattered by a species they had dismissed as primitives from a dangerous world. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change in ways that no one could have predicted. The Vorthach empire collapsed as world after world declared independence. Species that had lived in fear for generations began to explore space again, okay, knowing that bullies could be beaten. Ambassador Z of the Corellian Council stood in the same communication chamber where he had sent his desperate plea for help. But now he was recording a very different message to all civilized species of the galaxy. He began, the Corellian people owe their existence to the humans of Earth. When we faced extinction and the galaxy abandoned us, these remarkable beings risked everything to protect strangers they had never met. He paused, looking out at his rebuilt city, where human engineers worked alongside Corellian artists to create something new and beautiful. We have learned that true civilization is not measured by the size of your fleets or the power of your weapons. It is measured by your willingness to stand up for those who cannot protect themselves. The humans have shown us what that looks like. Captain Blake found himself addressing the Galactic Council 3 months later, the first human ever to speak before the galaxy's governing body. The same delegates who had refused to help the Carolans now listened respectfully as he outlined humanity's vision for the future. We did not come to your galaxy to conquer or to rule, he said simply. We came because someone asked for help, and we could not stand by and watch innocent people die. The century representative, who had been one of the first to refuse aid to the Carolinians, raised a question that many in the chamber were thinking. Captain Blake, what does humanity want in return for your intervention? Blake smiled, remembering the lessons his grandfather had taught him in the Alaskan wilderness. We want to live in a galaxy where the strong protect the weak instead of preying on them. We want to know that when someone calls for help, they won't be ignored, and if someone threatens Earth, ask the Altarian ambassador, then they'll learn why we call it a death world. Blake replied quietly. The session ended with the galaxy's first formal alliance dedicated to protecting peaceful species from aggressive empires. Humanity became not the rulers of the galaxy, but its guardians, ensuring that no species would ever again face extinction. While others looked the other way, Admiral Torres established the first human embassy on Carolyn Prime, while Captain Blake returned to Earth as a hero. But he knew that the real heroes were the ordinary men and women who had answered a stranger's call for help, knowing they might never come home. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous predators came from the most dangerous worlds, but more importantly, sometimes the greatest protectors came from the same place. In the end, the species that had pleaded for help discovered that their salvation had come from the most unlikely source of all, the Deathworlders, who had never learned to abandon those in need.